Okay, welcome. So last Sunday, I met with uh, Donald Rothberg, and we were just checking in. We check in regularly, and I asked him what he's been doing lately, and he said he's been working with so many people right now about working with conflict, and he was going to lead a group um, at Spirit Rock about working with conflict this week, and he did last week, and he was going to the next week, like 3 weeks. He said that's what everybody wants to talk about right now. So I figured, hey, I might as well too. We might as well go with it. I can't imagine why we would talk about that right now. It's such a big deal in our world. I just want to name that the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict has been incredibly triggering for me. And I'm sure for a lot of people. I've had a lot of people tell me. I have some Jewish friends who feel incredibly triggered by what's happening over in Israel. And my family's from Palestine and got kicked out of the country in 1948, and several of them were killed and during the switchover. And so I have generational trauma, a lot of generational trauma about the whole thing. So anytime there's conflict over there, I feel triggered, like, not pro this or anti that, just like panicky, triggered. So my son has been really triggered too, and my uncles, a lot of people in the family are just clinging to one another right now, in fear of what's happening, and just total distraught. And conflict is so unpleasant. Anybody agree with me? Yeah, it's so unpleasant, and it seems to be a normal part of being a human being, right? If we were all fully awakened, I'm sure there wouldn't be the level of conflict that we're having now, but we're not. So how do we navigate conflict when it arises in the world and within ourselves? Yeah. I did some research before. Since 1945, after World War I, there have been over 250, nearly 260 major wars on the earth. Yeah. With over 23 million killed. I'm sure that's higher now. Tens of millions are homeless, countless millions injured and bereaved. 90% have been civilian casualties. 3 out of the 4 fatalities have been women and children. Yeah, this is really heart-wrenching. There are 32 ongoing conflicts in the world right now, is what I found, ranging from drug wars, terrorist insurgencies, ethnic conflicts, civil wars, and yeah. So would you say that the earth is on fire with conflict right now? I would say probably it's showing up in a big way. And it's not that this is new. Anybody here a historian buff? Kind of, yeah. Then you probably heard about all the different I remember in history class thinking, I'll never be able to remember all these dates and conflicts. Yeah. So, where do conflicts come from within ourselves? They come from our histories, our personal attitudes, the history including our conditioning, what the stories we've been told about who we are, our needs, our expectations, our desires, our viewpoints, our personalities even. Even within my own family, there would be some people just rising to jump and have a conflict where I was usually pretty shrinking back and just watching quietly, not wanting to be part of the conflicts. So personality has a lot to do with it too. But Buddhism, I'm going to talk about Buddhism and how Buddhism tells us to deal with conflict. It tells that conflict is rooted in misunderstanding, totally misunderstanding who we are, forgetting who we are, right? And viewing ourselves as a separate, individual, disconnected self. And this is the primary misunderstanding, right? As soon as we create a separate sense of self, then we have to reify the sense of self. We have to defend the sense of self. We have to build it up, define it well. It's a really powerful thing to have this separate sense of self. And then we get really attached to our view of ourself as a separate self. And the truth is, we're not separate. I talk about this nearly every week, that we're interconnected, we're interdependent in a very deep and mysterious way. And you see that now. What affects other people on this planet is deeply impacting us. When we watch the news or hear stories, our hearts ache for other people on this planet, all people who are suffering on this planet. How can we even begin to think that what happens to others does not impact us? Right? If you even study generational trauma, that's kind of scary. Anybody studied that? Where you start seeing that trauma from our ancestors gets laid down in our DNA. Not all of our ancestors, but some of it gets passed on our DNA. So then we have to deal with trauma passed down from ancestors, as well as from society and our families and our experiences. But we start to meditate. If you start a daily practice, a daily spiritual practice, your heart starts to open. Your mind starts to soften. You start letting go of some of these strong ideas of my big self. And then when the mind and heart and body start to soften, you start sensing the beauty and the love and the connection of all beings that transcends the human thinking mind. It's not something you can comprehend through thinking. It's something that's a bare experience. You feel your heart turn towards other people and move towards and join other hearts together. We, of course, experience this more readily with our own children or young children or animals that we dearly love. It's natural with those kind of people. But as more and more we meditate, the more we let go of this separate sense of self, the more we sense our deep, interconnection. And I've heard other teachers say that, and we're breathing the same molecules once breathed by Julius Caesar, Jesus Christ, and even the Buddha are still on this circulating. I'm like, really? Okay, I'm enlightened. And we have these mirror neurons, right? You've probably learned about the mirror neurons that they're finding now that our brains start to wire together with other people that we hang out with, right? So if someone's really happy or loving and we're around this person, our brains start firing when the happy, loving pathways along with this person or people. Whereas if we hang around an angry person who's trying to create conflict, they can bring up our mirror neurons of anger and wanting to argue or have conflict with them. So the Buddha said to only surround yourself with wise people. He understood mirror neurons back in the day, right? Because he could sense it. It's really important who we surround ourselves with. But we're all human beings. We have emotions. We have losses. We've loved and lost. We've had defeats and failures and successes. This is part of the human condition. What really has touched me in my practice and in my life is understanding in a very intimate level this deep yearning for love and connection within myself, and to be understood, and to understand others. It's expanded to others, right? And that I realize that every human being just wants to be loved, and they just want to feel understood and connected. It's such a deep thing. Does anyone here know what I'm talking about, right? It's rooted within each and every one of us. We're wired that way, and that's what helps us connect with one another, with ourselves and one another. But people, when they feel disconnected and they feel like these needs aren't being met, they act out, and they're trying in their own really unhealthy ways to get the love and connection that they need through conflict. If I can't get it from being nice, then I'll get it from conflict. I know I'm oversimplifying conflict here, but their needs aren't being met. They're not feeling loved and appreciated, and so therefore they're acting out. They're feeling hurt and separate from everyone else. It's a really scary place to be a separate self. Because who's here with us? Absolutely nobody, right? When we're a separate self, it's a scary world. We're constantly in this place of insecurity and fear. But as soon as we remember who we are and open our hearts and connect with ourselves and others, the fear goes away. There's just appreciation and love. So in the one thing that really helps me with conflict, every time I've been in deep conflict with someone in my life, or if the world is overwhelming me, I change my practice, which I'm thinking about doing again, to metta, to loving kindness practice. Right? Because otherwise, when I'm doing mindfulness, I'm just being mindful of the jitteriness, mindful of the anxiety, mindful of the, all of this that's happening with all the conflict, the trauma being triggered, right? So when deep-rooted trauma gets triggered, I switch to metta, loving kindness practice, where I just sit for the whole 30 minutes, 45 minutes, hour, however long I meditate, and just do loving kindness, repeating it over and over and over again. What I find really interesting in the Visuddhimagga commentaries by Buddhaghosa, it's considered one of the main sacred Theravada Buddhist texts to learn from. In the instructions for practicing metta, the very first instruction is to start with, you should review the danger in hate and anger, and in the advantage and patience. So before you even start your metta, your loving kindness phrases, visualizations, you start with review the dangers in hate and anger, and the advantage and patience. Isn't that powerful? Yeah. So we need to continually remind ourselves of the danger of allowing ourselves to get caught in hatred or anger. And here's the Buddha. Friends, when a man is a prey to hate, and his mind is obsessed with hate, he kills living beings. Right? And the Buddha also said, no greater thing exists than patience. Yeah? So in order to avoid conflict, we need to not feed on hatred or anger. We need to bring loving kindness to ourselves and others when we're lost in hatred and anger. Yeah. This is I've said this before, in the Apanaka Sutta, the Buddha said there are 4 kinds of persons. The first kind of person torments themselves and pursues the practice of torturing him or herself. Torments himself and pursues the practice of torturing him or herself. The second kind of person torments others and pursues the practice of torturing others. This isn't funny. I shouldn't be laughing, but the way he put it is funny. The third kind of person torments self and pursues the practice of torturing self and torments others and pursues the practice of torturing others. So they torture and torment themselves and torture and torment others. The fourth kind of person does not torment themselves or others and does not pursue the practice of torturing self or others. And then he went on to say that the fourth person is a fully enlightened person. So we're probably going to torment or torture ourselves or others to some degree until we've, become fully awakened here. But we can have the practice of not wanting to torment or torture ourselves or others. And this is really important. And most people that I know don't torment or torture others much. They usually torment and torture themselves. And then this torment and torture within ourselves accidentally ekes out into conflict with others from time to time. But if we're in conflict with ourselves, I think it's going to be painful. In the numerical discourses, the Buddha spoke about how we put ourselves in hell realms through doing this. Yeah, tormenting and torturing ourselves and others. And his whole teaching was about cultivating a wholesome state of mind, right? Wholesome state of mind that doesn't torture or torment ourselves or others. And to do this, we want to focus on what's wholesome and avoid what's unwholesome. Don't feed our anger, don't feed our sense desires, and don't continue to do whatever you have to do to feed the small contracted sense of ego, self. Yeah. The Buddha's very last move that he did was there were two kingdoms who were fighting, who loved the Buddha, that were nearby. And he knew that when he died, they were going to fight over his dead body and want to enshrine his body. So he was dying, he was very sick, and he walked 10 miles to a neutral kingdom to die there so that nobody could fight over his body, so there wouldn't be a war over him, his body. So his very last act, dying in pain, and he walked 10 miles, was to keep people from engaging in conflict at his behalf. So the first thing we have to do is we have to see the amazing amount of suffering and torment that getting caught in conflict causes us, right? I came into work Monday morning. I work as a therapist for an addiction treatment center, and I have a boss who's a micromanager. Micromanager? Yeah. And so I came in Monday morning, had a great weekend. I was in a really good mood, and I opened my email, and there were all these like denigrating type emails with make sure you do this, don't do that, and implying all kinds of negative things. And immediately my mind went into a state of conflict, right? And I was like, oh my God, this is BS. What? I'm gonna tell her off. I'm sick and tired of this. Blah blah blah. So I got myself all worked up into this state, and I was making up all kinds of crazy stuff in my mind. This person must have said that. That person must have said this. I bet this is that. It was just my mind went a little bit wacko for a little while, and then I saw how much suffering I was. My whole body was contracted. My heart rate was up. My relaxed, happy self was like ready to just tell somebody off. My teeth and jaw, everything was in pain. Took a few deep breaths, and I said, what is it that you're fighting for right now, Rania? What is this anger about? Yeah. Oh, I didn't want my sense of self to be put down in any way or controlled in this way, right? It's like, oh, wow. So I was really attached to defending the sense of self, who wasn't doing a good job and who was not doing any of these things that were implied, that needed to be fixed right away. Anyhow, so as soon as I saw that clearly with mindfulness, I was able to let it all go and realize, just relax. And I also saw that this person who micromanages and sends a lot of emails is very anxious and filled with fear. And her sending all of these directives is just her way of trying to alleviate her own fear, right? So a sense of compassion and connection arose as soon as I let go of the sense of self, relaxed, and then felt compassion for her, right? Yeah. And then I responded to really kind emails back. Yeah, not always easy, right? But it's our practice, and that's just within one-on-one relationship stuff. But we need to notice when we're making up a bunch of stuff. If you text somebody, they don't respond right away, or they never respond. What does the mind start to do? Does it start making up a bunch of stuff? Let's, try, if you can, to not make up anything and just be in the state of not knowing. And when you're angry, bring loving kindness to yourself, bring compassion to yourself. When you're feeling a conflict within yourself or with others, attend to the contraction, because that's painful. Contraction is very painful. So the first step to working with conflict is to recognize the pain of getting caught, getting lost in conflict, right? Getting caught in the contracted ego self. We all do it. With the greater world conflict, I say that I will only take in what I can take in without getting lost in my separate sense of self. So if I can stay in a compassionate, loving, sending loving kindness to the world, to the groups of people who are suffering, then I can continue to take in the information. But if I feel overwhelmed and start feeling like my separate sense of self is suffering, I don't take in any more information until I can get regrounded again. Yeah. So when we're in conflict, we need to stop focusing and look on our differences and start looking at how we're the same. Because I've been probably micromanager if I was really lost in fear and having the desire to control. I think we all have before, right? So Shantideva, 8th century guide to Bodhisattva's way of life, he argued that the ordinary person attributes their anger to an external cause. Thinking if this person or situation would be different, I wouldn't be mad. But he invited us to stop looking at external conditions that make us mad and go to internal conditions to see where the anger is coming from, to see where the conflict is coming from within ourselves, that we need to accept within ourselves and be with the suffering. And be 100% committed to cultivating a wholesome state of mind when we're lost. Yeah. You know the story about the Buddha. A man came to him throwing insults at him and using a lot of superlatives, vile words and threats. And the Buddha asked him, if you attempt to give someone a gift and they refuse it, who does the gift belong to? And the man said, well, to me then. Whoever gives the gift, he said, well, I refuse your gift of abuse. Yeah, that's pretty cool. But yeah, if we can do that intellectually within our own hearts and minds.
Could you repeat that? I refuse the gift of abuse.
Yeah.
And then what did you say before that?
So a man came throwing a bunch of insults to him, and he
Right.
asked the man, if you give a gift to someone and they refuse to accept it, who does the gift then belong to?
Right.
And the man said, well, then to the giver of the gift.
Oh, that was where I dropped off.
Okay. And then the Buddha said, well, then I refuse your gift of abuse.
Right, got it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, I don't like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that wouldn't work well in my family. I refuse your gift of. But we also need to take responsibility for our part of the conflict. It's really important. How did we contribute to this conflict, and what do we need to take care of? The more we practice, the more we let go, the more we let go of our egoic thought processes, the sooner we can catch ourselves when we're lost in conflict within ourselves and with others. It's really helpful to practice compassion, empathy, and putting ourselves in other people's shoes, right? So that we can develop compassion for all people and all beings on this planet. We could easily be any other person on this planet, given the right causes and conditions and genetics. Yeah. So I forgot to bring it, but there's this Call Me by My True Name poem by Thich Nhat Hanh. Have any of you ever heard that? Where he goes in and says that I'm the girl, to the 10-year-old girl on a ship who's raped and thrown overboard by an angry pirate. I'm also the pirate. Never learned how to love. So it's a very long poem with all these different I am this, I am that, I am this, I am that. We really, since we are interconnected, we are all of these things in some level. So I hope that was helpful, and there's a lot more, so that's why we'll open it up to the group. Thank you for your deep listening. And I will